You might have heard about the 4-day work week. Perhaps you're wondering what it means. Isn't that just working part-time? We've been working 5 days a week for so long, it's hard to imagine any other way. Well, there is another way that's being trialled in countries including the UK, Belgium, Iceland and Japan. It works like this. Currently, if you're in full-time work, you're more or less expected to give 100% of the time for 100% of your pay. Well, the 4-day model is the same, only instead of 100% of the time, it's 80%. Your contribution and your pay remain the same. The big change is your time and an extra day to spend with your partner, pursue a hobby, or get those chores out of the way before the real weekend starts. It's currently being trialled in Australia in a handful of private businesses and NGOs, and has even been floated as a possibility in the public sector. Sounds amazing, right? Not to everyone.
It's an absolute shocker. People aren't meant to work, 4 days and get paid for 5. There's an old Roman term called pro rata, which is in proportion. You get paid in proportion for what you want. Inflation's on the rise, fuel prices are on the rise, mortgages are on the rise, and people are proposing that people work less. And if people work less, they'll get paid less eventually. It's just an absolute head scratcher.
Before delving into how a 4-day work week looks, let's go back and figure out how we even got to a 5-day work week. If you think working Monday to Friday is a grind, spare a thought for those in Australia who worked up to 14 hours a day, 6 days every week in the 19th century. In 1856, a turning point occurred. Melbourne stonemasons, who were in short supply, led the charge globally towards an 8-hour workday. However, the concept of a full 2-day weekend didn't become a reality in Australia until after the Second World War, with the 40-hour work week becoming the standard in 1948. Fast forward to 1981, when industrial action by 500,000 metalworkers resulted in the 38-hour work week we know today. And now, over 40 years later, and on the back of a pandemic that radically altered work arrangements for millions of people around the world, there's a new push to redefine the standard working week.
Well, it was born out of our successful trial of a 4-day week in our company, Perpetual Guardian, back in 2018. Andrew had this crazy idea that if he actually gave people more time off, maybe they'd be more productive at work. And who'd have thought it? They were.
This is Charlotte Lockhart, one of the founders of the 4-Day Week Global Foundation, a not-for-profit advocacy group based in New Zealand.
We had all these conversations around the world about what we'd done and how we'd done it and why we'd seen the results that we had. And so we established 4-Day Week Global really as a place to have those conversations, and it sort of rolled along. And then we had a pandemic, and the future of work conversation really changed, and people started looking at how they could fundamentally change the way that we work, across the world. And so in 2022, we started running group pilot programs. We've been helping companies pilot individually prior to that, but we established our group pilot program.
So to find out how all this works in practice, we called Dennis Moriarty, founder and group managing director of Our Community, a software company and social enterprise based in Melbourne, who implemented a 6-month trial of the 4-day work week.
We got to the 5-point month of the 6-month trial, and I basically said, we're not going to bugger ourselves around with this. It's working, it's proven. People are really reformed their work practices. We're having less meetings, less people in meetings. And we announced 1 month early, the 4-day week is staying permanently.
Okay, so doesn't less time in the workplace mean less interaction with colleagues and less connection and engagement with each other?
We circulate an email every Monday for staff that are working, saying to everyone what they're working on. But once we did the 4-day week, people started including what they were doing on their day off. And I think culturally that's been the most profound change that we've seen, that suddenly people are sharing photos of their kids, they're sharing photos of their gardening jobs that they're doing, fixing bikes up, the volunteering work that they're doing. And that's fundamentally given everyone an insight far more into their work colleagues than whatever they would at a Christmas party sitting next to them or chatting to them in the kitchen. It's a fundamental, real immersion of what do people do on this day off.
Okay, but this all comes at the expense of getting the work done, surely.
I think there's moments of stress where you are cramming things into 4 days that you would have taken 5 days. But I think they're so inconsequential to the overall scheme of things that it's not even worth talking about. I think the upsides are profoundly more important to focus on, and we're still doing the same amount of work. I think people are doing it smarter, they're doing it far more wiser, and they're more focused on what they are.
It's all sounding a bit too good to be true, and surely this model can't work across all sectors. So let's check in with Rita Fontina, Associate Professor in Strategic Human Resource Management at the Henley Business School in the UK, and an independent researcher into the 4-day work week, who has weighed up both sides of the argument.
It is very important to consider that to also validate the voices against the 4-day week. It is very natural that a change like that is considered radical, and it is very radical. So for it to actually be successful, it needs to be implemented in a conservative way. So if we were to have a law that says tomorrow everybody will work 4 days, then let's say you have a small business and you employ 5 or 6 people, you need to hire more, and you may not have the funds available. So this transition, and I think the value of these trials is exactly to understand the processes of implementation and to make sure that we are doing it in a stepwise approach, and also consider the sector differences, because there are some sectors, especially healthcare, for example, that would really benefit in terms of mental health, and the outcomes for the patients, for example, would be very important, but there are just not enough people. So we need to be careful when to talk about wide implementation of this. But it's very good that we are taking the first steps in this sense, because the results tend to be consistent in that it's better for people overall and for companies overall as well.
While the implementation might pose challenges and skepticism persists in some quarters, the positive results from global trials and the emerging support from different sectors can't be ignored. The exploration of a 4-day work week might well be the next step in evolving how we define full-time work.